Lowe's knows how to help you get the most out of your store run. That's why members save more with My Lowe's Rewards. Earn points towards My Lowe's money on eligible purchases. Get access to member-only deals and free member gifts. Plus, unlock free standard shipping when you reach Silver Key status. So what are you waiting for? Join for free today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
Hey, I'm Greer. Welcome to the Unfinished Idea podcast, a space for you to expand your understanding about the neurodiverse world, which is all around us. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us as we help bring awareness and better understanding about those who are neurodivergent and families who are raising children with special needs. I'm a mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and together with my husband, raising a child with additional needs. I often feel lonely and overwhelmed in my daily experience because life looks different for us. This podcast will share practical help, tips, and insights into the difficulties, joys, and differences of the neurodiverse world. So let's start the conversation. At the end of this episode, we are taking a minute to rest, reflect, and learn a new way to help us do self-care. So make sure to listen all the way to the end to have that minute of reset. Today, Ian, a dad, a partner to a neurodivergent, and an ADHD coach, and I are diving into what it's like when both people in the relationship are neurodivergent. We talk about how that shared understanding can create a unique bond. Sometimes your partner just gets it without you having to explain, but it's not always smooth sailing. Ian shares how overcommunication, giving each other space, and constant growth are key to making it work. We also explore how friends and family and communities can better support neurodivergent couples, because having that right support system makes all the difference. So let's grab your drink and let's jump into our conversation with Ian. And don't forget to stay till the end, where we are asking questions that we can ask those we're in relationship with. So Ian, you and your partner are both neurodivergent. What is that like?
Yeah, that's a huge question, isn't it, really? Of course, I don't know anything else apart from being neurodivergent in a relationship, because I'm being neurodivergent. So I guess every relationship I've had is to a degree a neurodivergent relationship, even if it's just me bringing the neurodivergence in any given relationship. But the relationship that I'm in now, both me and my partner are neurodivergent and are knowingly neurodivergent, I guess, which is quite new as well, because of course, I was undiagnosed for a long time, as was my partner. It's perhaps easier if I talk about what it's like when I'm in a relationship, and I'm talking about also friendship relationships as much as romantic relationships, I guess, with a neurotypical person. So when that's happening, it's like I'm talking in a different language. So it's like I've learned to speak neurotypical over the years, so I can do it. Whether I pass as acceptable, I don't know. That's a different matter. Perhaps not. I'm more fluent in it than I used to be, but there's a translation process going on all the time. What is that person saying to me? What do they mean by that? What am I saying back to them? How do I appear to them? Am I looking at them in the eye enough? What's my body language doing? All of these things that often for autistic people never become intuitive, always stay on that real kind of intellectual, cognitive level. When that's happening, I can certainly do it, but it's exhausting. It takes a lot of extra energy to have those conversations because I'm constantly aware of wanting to fit in, I guess, or not wanting to be weird, or just being aware that what I'm doing or saying may be misinterpreted through a neurotypical lens. So there's a whole layer that is really tiring. Now, when I'm around my neurodivergent friend, that happens a lot less. I mean, it still can happen because we're talking 50 years of learning to behave in particular ways in society. But it can happen a lot less. And so my partner understands that if I'm not looking at her in the eyes while I'm talking, it's not because I'm being distant. It's not because I'm rejecting her. It's because it can be just too intense for me. It's a huge amount of sensory input. Look at someone in the eye. I can do it. But if you want me to be able to talk at the same time, that's almost too many things going on. I can comfortably not look at her, but feel comfortable doing that in the knowledge that, I know she understands what's actually happening here. You know, it's not a kind of rejection. It's not a cutting off. And there's certain ways of communication as well that are quite specific to the neurodivergent community. We like to, it's almost, I'm not saying I can't, because I'm autistic and ADHD, different factors can come into play with me. A lot of autistic people, when we're communicating with each other, there can be a real kind of almost taking turns to deliver monologues to each other, or taking turns to, what's called info dump. Here's a lot of information that I'm going to tell you right now, blah, 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 and I'll talk for 15 minutes about it all, and then it's your turn. Which is sometimes is misinterpreted in the neurotypical community as being, something that it's not. It can look like something. It can look like you're not listening. You're not caring about what the other person is thinking, that you're only thinking about yourself and what's going on for you. Whereas actually it comes from often, I speak for myself, often it comes from a really different place. It comes from, I'm so excited to tell you all of this stuff. And if I don't tell you it now, I'm never going to remember it. And if I don't follow this train of thought, it's gone forever. So here it all comes out in one big go. And so it's nice to be able to have that in that relationship.
How have you, in any of your relationships, either romantic or friendship, come to realize that?
So a lot of that has come from research, looking into and reading about what autism is and what ADHD is, how it manifests in different ways, and connecting with the other people within the autistic and the neurodivergent community, hearing their stories, as opposed to the common deficit model given by the medical model. You're not very good at this, you're difficulties with social communication. So learning about that and being around people who understand that and communicate in the same way, very liberating, and because there's a whole layer of shame that goes along with being autistic. I shouldn't be communicating the way that I am, or the way that I behave towards other people is wrong. There's something wrong with me. There's something, because I don't communicate necessarily in the same way as other people do. And you learn to hide that, because you don't get to be 50 years old, worked all my life, studied, unless you learn how to fit in and play the game. But like I was saying earlier, it costs a lot of energy to play by those particular rules. And often you don't successfully do it. You suddenly realize, oh God, I've made the classic mistake of somebody's asked me how I am, and I've actually answered them. I've told them everything that's going on in my life and all the struggles that I'm having, and actually all they really were wanting to hear was, oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you? So you do that for 10 minutes. Even as you're doing it, are going, oh God, I'm doing it again. I can see in their face what's happening. Then you go away, feel a lot of shame and embarrassment. And being around people who understand that way of communicating and who ask you, how are you? And genuinely want to know how you are. It's not a social nicety. It's not a small talk kind of thing. It's a genuine thing. So it's just, there's a certain level of relaxation and joy that comes out of, actually, I can be much more my true, genuine self around another neurodivergent person. And then there's the kind of ADHD side of things, which is, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but I think it's true to a degree, is often when I'm talking to a neurotypical person, I have to slow my thought processes down. Like, I go at 1,000,000 miles an hour inside my head all the time. And so in order for it to make sense to someone else, particularly a neurotypical person, I have to really pull that back and slow down, because it could look on the face of it, someone says something to me and I've said something back that's a complete non sequitur, it seems to bear zero relation to what's actually happened. Is they've said something to me, I've had like 10 thoughts that have been linked to the thing that they've said, and what they're hearing is the last thought that's come out of that. And so there's a sense of, I've got to really pull that back and slow down and actually respond to what was the thing they're saying right now. Whereas when I'm talking with my ADHD friends, it's just a huge explosion of communication. I'll say something, they'll say something. And on the face of it, it might look like none of these things are related to each other, but things will come back around full circle, and they understand that actually there will be a link, and we don't know what it is. There's a real playfulness about it, super quick and interesting. You never know where it's going to go. And there's no shame about it. There's no like, oh God, I don't walk away feeling like, oh God, the other person is going to have felt like I wasn't really listening, because I I was really listening. It's just that my links are not always the same links as other people might necessarily make.
So you reminded me of a situation, and now I feel like I have to share. It's like an aha moment.
Please.
When you were saying, I like your thought is 10 thoughts away. The idea that, like, I was talking to a good friend who has ADHD, and he said something, and I remember looking at him going, how did you get that from what I said? He explained his thought process. He had like 10 steps of thought in 30 seconds. And I was like, oh, okay. Like once he explained kind of his thought process, I remember being like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense now. And like, I could see where it's all connected. And you saying that has just been like a total aha of like, yeah, this actually does happen. Like this was people who have ADHD, their brain is literally just thinking so much faster. So yeah, that was thank you for sharing that, because
that's wonderful, and I think I spoke to you about it before, but where I believe societal change is going to happen is in conversations between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. That's the cutting edge of change. I believe that's where, real learning and growth can take place, is where those conversations happen. And that's where, a lot of my work, some of my work is focused on. However, I do need my neurodivergent community, because that's the community that I can relax in and I feel safe in, and it's just a nice, easy place for me to be, where I'm surrounded by people who I know are not judging me, and will understand that, oh hey, maybe like Ian's a really, really great friend who I see every day for 6 months, and then maybe I don't see him for 2 months, but that's okay. There's not a rejection in there. It's just doing something else, or people, or something. For those people, to be surrounded by people who understand the meaning of my behavior and my words is really important, where it's often been misinterpreted over the years. It's not that I can't explain my meaning and behavior to neurotypical people. I can, but it takes a lot of energy. It's just nice to be around people who I don't have to do that as much, and especially if it's like a romantic relationship, And then on the other side, there's also all the challenges that you face as a neurodivergent person. So, for example, having a meltdown, a natural, healthy neurodivergent response. It's a release, a coping strategy, a way of dealing with overwhelm. And people have meltdowns in a lot of different ways. I had one last week, and so there I am, curled up in a ball under a blanket, guttural, emotional, sobbing, primal kind of emotions, and that my partner understands that, and I feel safe to do that around her, because you can't do that around everyone, and for her to understand that, and she understands kind of what I might need in that moment, or there's a sense of it's okay for me to do that in those moments, and likewise, it's okay for her to do that as well. I understand when that's happening.
What would you say to a couple who are, one's neurotypical, one's neurodivergent, when they're having a meltdown? What would you say to them, and kind of maybe advice that you would give that couple?
Okay, so this is going to be very specific to the individual, in my experience. And I've worked as a primary school teacher for 12 years. So I've worked with a lot of neurodivergent children over the years, and also working as a coach as well. Different people are going to need different things in a meltdown, and they may or may not be able to communicate to you what they need in that moment. So it might be a conversation that can happen before a meltdown or after a meltdown, where you could say to your partner, hey, look, when this is happening, this is what's going on for me, and these are the things that help me. So for me, and I know for some neurodivergent people, when a meltdown is going on, of course, there's a real temptation, if you're the partner, to, hey, what's going on? Is everything all right? And hugs, and I just want to make sure everything's okay. Whereas actually, when I'm in that state, I can't process any more sensory information, whether that's talking, anything else. I just kind of need to be kind of let alone in my little bundle under a blanket. And it's nice if I know someone's there. That's great. But for me to be able to, I can't process anything if there's someone. That adds to the cognitive load. If someone's asking me if I'm okay, if someone's touching me, any of that stuff is all just too much for me. Whereas for other neurodivergent people, deep pressure can often be really helpful for them. A really strong hug so they feel contained, some soothing words, so it's personal and individual. Have that conversation, but perhaps don't have it when the meltdown's going on.
Would you say have that conversation in dating, or would you say wait till you're married or living together? When would you say to have that conversation?
That's again a really personal thing, I think. So for me, disclose to pretty much everyone all the time about my diagnosis. Often within the first 10 minutes of a conversation, I'm saying, look, I've got ADHD, I'm autistic. So any differences that you may find in the way I'm communicating to you, that's what this might be as a result of. And I celebrate it. I'm happy to be the way I am. I wouldn't change it. There's nothing wrong with me. It's not a disease in my view. So I'm really open about it. And I talk about all those things. And because I work with children as well. And it's really important for me that I model that to the children that I work with, that they see it's okay to be different. It's okay for me to be the way that I am. Communication is going to be the key to most relationships in whatever, and communication can look different for a lot of different people. So I think earlier on in a relationship that you can talk about these things, perhaps the better. It feels like it would be good to. I mean, I'm not saying on a first date you're going to, within the first 5 minutes, you're going to be, hey, look, just in case I have a meltdown, but I think it's. It is super important. But that leads me on to thinking about different kinds of communication as well. So my partner said something to me the other day, which was very moving for me, actually. She said, oh, look, she said, I know sometimes it's difficult for you to show how much you love me in certain ways, perhaps verbally or something like that. But she says, I know that when you're cooking me a meal and when you're doing all these things that you do, I'm really practical, do things around the house a lot, She says, I know that you're telling me you love me. And it's so true. And I was so moved by it, that it actually keeps coming back to me over the past couple of weeks. People can say that to you, but they don't actually always, on a kind of deep level, understand or believe it. Whereas when it came from her, and I thought, no, actually, you do. That is genuinely true. You actually do know that is a way that I'm expressing myself for the times when it can be really difficult for me to tell someone how much I love them, because for lots of reasons. I think I think it comes down to emotional vulnerability and childhood, and there's a whole load of trauma and all sorts of stuff to unpick in there, So it's just wonderful to be with someone who accepts where I am rather than where they would like me to be. That's not quite the right way of putting it, But I'm thinking about the kind of fairy tale myth that we've been since the early days of Hollywood of what a good relationship looks like. Happily ever after, which of course is not how a successful relationship works. It's a lot of hard work, You've got to put the blood, sweat and tears in. That's what, for me, that's what makes a relationship work, It's not just plain sailing and
love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's alive.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships at Bermudan and British Registry.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pup, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
Yeah, I was just talking to my husband about this and how Disney always stops at the wedding and very rarely does Disney continue after the wedding. And what if Disney actually continued after the wedding? What would we see? And he was saying exactly one we'd see a lot of hard work and one we'd see a lot of arguments. But we don't see that because it always stops at the wedding. It always stops, where, I don't know, for me, our wedding was very fairy tale like, and it, but we continued on. We aren't a Disney film in that we just stopped at the wedding. It continued on, which, that was like a total random conversation we had. But I also wondered, as you were talking, you kind of made me think about the 5 love languages. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, I am. Yeah, and that's something I've thought about, and it's not that it's not that I don't want to communicate in other ways as well. So I do want you, because I want to be growing as a person, and I want to be challenging myself to reach into some of those emotionally vulnerable places and have those conversations. Absolutely. But it's being with someone who understands that might be difficult. And the reason for that is not them, that they don't internalize that and go, oh, it must be because of me that Ian's not telling me these things. But that was a conversation that happened, that was like, that had to be a conversation to say that. And so I feel really lucky,
Talking about being vulnerable and feeling vulnerable, like obviously there are some people who really want that in a relationship, which is totally fine. And there's some who don't. How could someone who maybe is in a relationship where someone does want them to be a bit more vulnerable, how could they navigate that? Is there something that they could, I don't know, is there something they could do? Is there something that they could, and maybe it's just having a conversation and saying, I can't, this is really difficult for me, or yeah.
I think acceptance is really, really important in a relationship, of accepting people how they are and where they're at in that moment. And I'm talking about, neurotypical, neurodivergent, whatever you are, there's the great thing where it's starting to, it's coming out more in like a lot of these narratives is the idea of intersectionality. So we're not all just, I'm a neurotypical person, or I'm a straight white male, or I'm an autistic person, or I'm a black woman, There is a huge different amount of cultures and things coming together in any one individual. And so accepting people for where they're at is really, really important. Having those conversations where possible, but it might not always feel safe to that other person to have that conversation for so many different reasons. We all have so many different things that we carry with us from the past. Our emotional responses to current situations are heavily predicated upon what's come before. So being patient with each other, accepting, loving, and trying to create space safe enough for both of you within that to be vulnerable. And being vulnerable can look different for different people. Some people might find it really easy to express their love, but you might find it really difficult to express their anger. Some people might find it really difficult to, conversely, be angry, but it's not safe for them to express their love or some other stuff, So it's about finding that space where it's like, is it safe to kind of access those parts of myself that feel really difficult? And also, look, we've developed coping strategies sometimes. And so it may never feel safe to access some of this stuff. And can that be okay as well? Is there a space where actually we don't need to be digging away and picking at all the scabs if it's not perhaps, the best thing to do at that time? It has to be a constant kind of, you're seeking an equilibrium and a balance. And at times it's going to be more weighted one way, and at times it's going to be more weighted another way. Can you support each other through all of that? Can I be there for your meltdown and you be there for my meltdown? Can we take turns? Because if we both have a meltdown at the same time, that's going to be quite a lot. But hey, that happens as well.
What would be one thing that you would want the world to know about neurodiverse people and being in relationships with them?
That we are still people. This is maybe slightly different now because of my age. But when I was growing up, the idea of autistic people was almost like, oh, they're a different species. They're weird. They're different. But actually, no, we're still human beings. Our responses, our emotion, we experience the same emotions, They might manifest slightly differently. We might communicate them slightly differently, but we are fundamentally the same, we're the same. We function slightly differently in the world, and that's great because society needs all sorts of different people in order to function successfully. But I get sad the same way you get sad. I get happy the same way you get happy. A neurotypical person would have a meltdown also if they were dealing with the same amount of sensory input and cognitive overload as I deal with on a daily basis. The reason I have a meltdown is because I'm getting more information. I'm feeling things more. It's harder to regulate my emotions, but I'm still a human being.
Yeah, that's really true that you're still human. And that's just because you process things differently does not mean you don't feel things. So that's really... What's one final tip that you would give someone who is in a relationship with a neurodivergent person?
For me, this is something that really works, is to find the humor as much as possible in these situations that we end up finding ourselves in, I mean, I say to the children at school often, if I'm going into a new school, I always tell because I work as a supply teacher, I always tell the children a bit about myself at the start of the day. I'm autistic, I've got ADHD. That sometimes leads to conversations like, oh, what does that mean? What is that? And that's a huge question. But just as a kind of example, so I'll say to them, oh, hey, that feeling when you go into a room and you suddenly go, oh, God, I can't remember what I came into this room for. Like, I know I came in here for some reason, but I can't remember what it was. My brain's going so fast all the time that, it's very hard to keep track of what I was doing and where I was going and what I'm thinking. And in fact, I can't even remember the question that you asked me that led me down this train of thought. Finding the humor. So as equally as frustrating as that can be to repeatedly find myself in those situations, oh God, what am I doing? Where did I leave my keys? What have I done with this? What have I done with that? But if you can keep coming back to just enjoying that in a way, like if you can be around other people who are like that as well, and to see the innate humor in being the way that we are. And I don't mean that as making light of something, because I take it incredibly seriously at the same time, but that those two things are not separate, that I can take something incredibly seriously and find it hilarious at the same time. And if you can find that might not make sense to anyone but me, but if you can find that kind of point of balance where I'll often, I'll take the mick out of my partner for being autistic, like she'll say something and I'll make fun of it, because I'm allowed to, because I'm autistic myself, and it's okay, it's okay to enjoy those things about ourselves. As frustrating and annoying as it can also be wonderful. We're all wonderful human beings in all of our glory, all of the little things that make us different. I include everybody in that, not just autistic people. We can enjoy all those things about ourselves that celebrate the things that make us different instead of making each other feel ashamed or embarrassed about it, So important, Greer. All I was going to say is, when I'm working with children at school, my absolute key is any children, but it's often the neurodivergent children who this would apply to, is to remove the sense of shame as quickly as possible. It's okay what you've done, whatever it is that you've done. There's no shame around this. Like, it's okay. Everything's okay. We're all okay. We're all in this together. It's all fine. And that's the message that I hope to send to anyone that I'm in a conversation with or working with, is it's okay. Everything's fine. It's all right. You are absolutely fine. You're not something to be embarrassed about. You're not something to be ashamed about. You're not something to be worried about. That's all I can say. But I guess a lot of it is because that's what I really wanted in my childhood.
Yeah, that's a really good point of I guess releasing the shame, or removing, that's the word I'm looking for, removing the shame. It opens up conversation for so much more things and opens up more opportunities for people to share their experiences. And, replacing that stigma with life experiences is so key to bringing change in any situation, and kind of, being able to have open conversation. I think back about, my best friend, I can have any conversation with her because I know there'll be no shame. Like, I know no matter what I tell her, she'll still be there. She'll still get my back. And so it's really important to think that just in general, like removing that shame.
Absolutely. And for a long time, the neurodivergent community has been, not intentionally, but we've been seen as the ones that have something wrong with us, just because there's maybe less of us than there is neurotypical people. There's a lot of shame around that, whereas it could happen, and it sometimes does within the neurodivergent community, that, rather than that conversation being, the conversation is often, or growing up was, oh, stop being you're too sensitive, you're too sensitive about stuff. You get too emotional about stuff, and the conversation could equally go the other way of going, well, you're not sensitive enough. What's wrong with being sensitive, And so the narrative just needs to switch a little bit from that kind of, there's something wrong with us, or there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with anybody, to just being that, hey, like, look, we're different. We're different, and we have different ways of communicating. Isn't that great? Because wouldn't it be so boring if it wasn't like that, And all of those forms are completely valid, whether that be that you are completely nonverbal, which is entirely fine as well, of course, or you're very verbal, like I perhaps can be sometimes. Great. We're all just beings in the world, aren't we? We're all just here being in the world and trying to do the best we can with what we're given, and help each other and support each other as much as we can in all of that. And every single interaction that we have with another human being has consequences. Nothing is inconsequential, especially working with children, coaching and counseling, but everything you say, those neurodivergent children are often hypersensitive and will pick up if you're feeling annoyed, frustrated. They will understand, and they'll know you are sending out that unspoken message. You're winding me up. You're frustrating me. There's something, it happens. It's okay to get frustrated with each other, but let's just be aware of what's happening within ourselves. Let's just take a moment to regulate ourselves, perhaps, before we then respond to the child in that particular way, or the other person in that conversation. Can we take that moment to notice what's happening in ourselves so that we can respond to that other person from a place of acceptance and understanding, as opposed to coming from our own insecurities and triggers as much as possible, if that makes any sense.
Removing things just means there's more room for other things. And so taking away all of that is a really good point. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today and sharing all of your advice. It's been very helpful. And like I said, I've had a few aha moments of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure talking to you as well, Greer. Anytime you can get me back on, I'll talk about anything for as long as you need.
Over the last couple of weeks, we've been diving into all the relationships, friends, family, partners, you name it. And to keep things interesting, I've been wrapping up with 3 questions that you can ask those you're in relationship with. But if you're like me and you want more, there's a whole list of questions waiting for you down in the show notes below. So here are your 3 questions. What's one thing on your bucket list you haven't told anyone about? If you could have any superpower, but only for one day, what would you choose? What's a song that instantly puts you in a good mood? And would you sing it at karaoke? I would love to hear your responses, so please send me a message or tag me on social media with your responses or the responses of those you've asked. And keep asking questions. Make sure you're following the show on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any future episodes. When you hit the follow, each week the episode will show straight up in your podcasting feed. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week.